Welcome to Divcasts from University of Chicago Divinity School. For more of our podcasts and information about our terms of use, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts.
I want to welcome you all, and first of all, tell me if this is clear for everybody, this volume. Wonderful. I'm Michael Sells of the Divinity School in Comparative Literature, and it's a great pleasure to introduce our current program this year, and then Professor Bowman will be introducing our guests. This is the first year of the second phase of the Mellon Islamic Studies Initiative, aka MISI, M-I-S-I. And this is, we call this MISI 2. And MISI 2 brings one distinguished visiting professor each year to teach for 2 quarters and to offer a lecture and a workshop. And I just want to let you all know that the workshop will be on February 20th, Friday. And the schedule will be announced in the regular email listservs and on the posters. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much to our coordinator, Nora Jacobson Ben-Hamad. And yes, thank you. Who have been a wonderful organizer throughout the year. And there will be a reception after the talk in this room, and you are all invited, so I hope you will stay for that as well. And now I'd like to introduce Professor Phil Bowman of the Music Department, who will introduce our guest.
How does this work? Great. Thank you, Michael. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to introduce to you Regula Qureshi, one of the giants of the field of ethnomusicology and religious studies. There are so many things that one could say about Regula, but I'll confine my comments to 2 larger areas that are so important for those of us when we consider this career of a scholar who has really influenced us in so many different ways. First of all, I'd like to call attention to the remarkable ways in which Regula Qureshi draws people of diverse backgrounds together in dialogues about borders, bringing us to borders and change those borders eventually. Borders, or rather the crossing and reconfiguration of borders, have in many ways defined Regula's life. As an intellectual, as a scholar, she comes from a remarkable tradition both in her family and in her home country of Switzerland, where I visited her, indeed, in the family home, Yahus Raumat. As a musician, Regula moves between Western classical music and the musics of South Asia. She's an ethnomusicologist, trained in anthropology, but fully at home in music. She approaches sacred music, too, along its borders, reposing questions about the most fundamental questions concerning the meanings that emerge at the borders between, well, for example, beauty and ecstasy. She has, we know her major publications, but let me remind you about the breadth that they encompass. We know, of course, her work on the Muslim community in North America, which she co-edited with her husband, Salim Qureshi. her remarkable book, which she has in her hand, I see, a book that we teach in every introductory class in ethnomusicology. We learn about transcription from it, but we learn more about faith and meaning and sound and beauty, and that, of course, Sufi music in India and Pakistan, sound context, and meaning in Qawwali. She's contributed to understanding music and labor, especially through her edited volume, Music and Marks, and her marvelous study of the Sufi, which we find, which is entitled Master Musicians of India, Hereditary Southern Ghee Players Sufi. At the University of Alberta, Regula has done many different things. She's been professor of music. She was the founder and director of the Canadian Centre for Musicology and co-founder and past director of FolkwaysAlive, which also reveals the way in which she's very much a part of the lives of musicians throughout the many worlds in which she lives and through which she moves. The second larger area that I'd like to address is the way in which Regula Qureshi has been a special friend to us at the University of Chicago, actually for more years than she and I might care to enumerate, but I'll say a few words about those anyway. I tried to count the number of times she has visited us, whether for colloquium already, I think in the 1980s when ethnomusicology was pretty fresh here, conference on music in American religious experience, which was co-sponsored by the Divinity School, and in the book that emerged from that conference, she actually contributed the opening chapter. And she's been here for board meetings of the Society for Ethnomusicology and colloquia of all kinds. Regula contributes to the book's edit, and then to the reading that we consider canonic. And we published even some of the books she writes, notably her great Sufi music in India and Pakistan, which appeared in its second edition at the University of Chicago Press. And she even advises our faculty, Kay Mason, in their PhD studies. Isn't it only fitting that we can welcome her this year as a visiting professor in the Mellon Islamic Studies Initiative at the Divinity School. Again, as a teacher, as a scholar of religion and music, and as a friend. Please join me in welcoming again Regula Qureshi, who will speak today on Sufi music of India, Pakistan, feudal ritual to global challenge. Welcome, Regula.
I'm overwhelmed with the amount of love, appreciation, friendship, and teaching. I feel very taught when I'm here because there is so much richness in this university, and especially in these two departments where I'm very at home, and I want to just thank all of you for making this possible. Above all, I want to thank Professor Sells for including me in this very demanding and impressive program, which has challenged me a lot. I've been trying to do what this initiative is trying to achieve, and I don't know if we're still trying to bring together Islamic studies, and it's more necessary now than before, to bring together Islamic studies and understandings of Islam with other disciplines, where it's possible maybe to reach more people and to open up more doors that make maybe collaboration possible, and that's certainly something we're trying to do for the workshop on the February 20th, so I hope you will come to that. Thank you, Phil Bowman, thank you, Anne Robertson, and thank you, music department from being a real home. It'll be very difficult for me to leave again, that's for sure. And in most particularly, Kaylee Mason has become an advisor. Once he was a student, and now I'm a student of his. So this is the best kind of experience we can have as profs. Okay. Why is this not staying alive? The topic of Sufism is one that I have lived with in so many ways. And then there's always an embarrassment of riches of what I would like to say and what I think is important. But today, I refrain from getting into a lot of details because it's a bigger question that I think we have to ask. And it's a bigger question about how a very ancient tradition of piety, of mysticism, is being very strongly affected by the world the way it is today. And there are people in all walks of life who are trying to approach this tradition and the changes that are about to happen or are already happening. What is happening here? I think so many changes of this kind are happening today, and it prompts us to look at the way we have studied. And that's where I want to start. Nowadays I'm starting with that, because how the results of my studies are totally involved and connected with who I am and how I decided to do that. So normally in times when the discipline, at least in ethnomusicology, it was pretty stable. We all have rules to follow of how to study and what to study, and it was relatively informal and it seemed relatively unproblematic. That time is over, in my view. In my view, what is happening now is we have to look at our work and the results of our studies and ask, where is this coming from, and should it just continue? Can we just go and take yet another tradition and do yet another study of it? Or are there more serious questions? And so the first question that I personally have to ask is, and I guess it took a lot of years for me to actually do this questioning, where is the formation that brings a person to do a certain kind of study? I studied Sufi music, and part of my formation was no doubt Protestant theology, and the rebel in the family who became a sculptor and then converted to Islam, Regula Burckhardt. And I grew up with a sort of sideways glance, and everyone had said, well, there he lives. They are not in the church. Everyone else, of course, was in the church, and only artists left the church. And he was a sculptor, he married a painter, and I wasn't particularly concerned after that, because I was myself very conventional. We all grew up in the 50s and 60s as very conventional people in Switzerland. We had it too good, I think. So, however, Titus is writing, and the connection of his work, of his religious study of his study of Sufism is very connected with his vocation as an art historian and an incredibly sensitive expert, or I should say, a person involved in the fine arts. So that actually was that fitted with me and with my goals. And I was very keen at one point to follow and to understand how he was interpreting Sufism. And in some way, the way I read it is that he was laying out that faith and the issue of the divine and how to relate to that. He found a way that actually moved away from the conventional theology into a kind of an aestheticism, so that beauty, in a sense, takes the place of truth. And this is totally my understanding. I don't want to presume to know what the official interpretation is. But for me, that has stayed with me. The aesthetic and the desire to get out of the study the depth of faith, the depth of thinking, the depth of mysticism, that kind of study, mining art and art objects, and of course for me it was music that I was mining. So music was my goal, and when I went to India, I found that my teachers, particularly one, my main teacher, he said, yeah, talk about religion, they are Muslims. Really, music is God. There is God, but for them, that is where they place the meaning of music. Okay, so what I therefore, I'm starting with this because I then moved on to create the kind of work that Phil was mentioning and my dissertation, and that work is extremely, what should I say? It's kind of social science, because it's based very much on the notion that you have to use objective criteria in order to understand what Sufi music is and what people do. The one thing that we stayed away in my time, in the time of linguistic anthropology, we stayed away from in any way approaching the knowledge of what Sufism or what Islam means to anybody. Because at that time, the principle was you study what you can apprehend. You can either see it or you can perceive it with the senses, or you can either observe what happens, what people do, or you can listen to what they tell you. That's it. You cannot get into their heads. And we have no, and that was a very good sort of a lesson, because I think as, kind of intellectual family, well, we knew truth and we could tell a lot of people's truths to them. So I backed off that, and it's still a good principle. But then I would like to now say, well, I'll not go into explaining how I learned to analyze Sufi music. You can see it, you can read it. What I really want to do is revisit the experience of the people themselves, the musicians. And so the first, I think we should start with, in fact, an experience ourselves. There is a very important time dimension in my work, which I never paid any attention to because I just keep, we keep going, we keep our studies up, and our teachers are continuing. They get older, but that's all right. We do too. But eventually, things change. I went back to India when I was in Delhi. I was invited to take part of this Aga Khan project, and I met, after a long time, the children of my teacher of Sufism, who is himself a Qawwali. He is now in his high 80s. He's not well. I was very happy to see that he's well enough, and he's getting treatment because these people are very poor. However, he now is just, you could say, he's a symbol of the music that he used to make. Now it is his children who do it. And to meet that and to see that things are not the same anymore. The tradition is not the same, and it will not be. And so the whole question of change that we are ourselves part of, that is something that I find now is important to look at, because it's clear that in the larger world, and certainly the larger Muslim world, change is upon us in rather violent ways. So the best I would like to think that I can do is let's go through some of my experiences with my important Sufis, Sufi musicians, and then ask ourselves, what is that foundation that kept this tradition going for centuries? I mean, it's more than 5 centuries. What kept it going, and what is happening now? What can we expect? And most particularly, there is a really interesting movement that I could never expect. In my study of Qawwali, I chose Qawwali because I had an opportunity to go to India and to Pakistan to meet people, and because I married a person with a Muslim background, so it is Muslims and their culture that I was first immersed in. And I found that there were all this music. People were singing. Well, of course I had to learn later on that this is not really music. We don't call it music because these were religious chants or religious soundscapes, whatever. Now we're very aware of this now. It took decades. So we are willing now not to call it music and saying, well, this is a sound composition or whatever. But so I learned that. Nevertheless, I mean, for the ear, and certainly for a European ear, that it was music. And all the people who come to learn it from us, they come because they like sound. They like sound which is aesthetically put together, and they like to call it music. And the department that we are in is a music department. So this is something we haven't yet solved. But I think it's possible. And we also find more understanding on the Muslim side, that they say, all right, these people think this is music. It's all right, they mean well. They're not making cartoons about us. So, all right. So this is an amazing thing that is happening now, the change. Now, the question is, and the big change, of course, is that at the time in the 70s, when I studied Qawwali. Why did I study it? Because I went there and my ears and eyes were open, and I learned that out of all the different Muslim hymns, the religious music, chants and songs for the Prophet, for his birth, and also chants for the martyrs of the Shia religion. So there are wonderful chants for that, and others. But of all of these, and I heard all of them, and I have a big repertoire in my head of all of these. It's a wonderful experience. But what I found most intriguing was Qawwali, the Sufi music. Now in that genre, the people who sang and made the music were professional. It was not a community thing, and it still isn't. The community are the Sufis, who are seeking to hear the kind of sound, the kind of singing or chanting that it will enable them to advance on their spiritual path. So it's really not about music. Music is a means, and I was told, for instance, the songs, no Sufi will say that we are creating the meaning, or we are creating the effect. No, it is God who creates the effect. They know that they can sing the same hymn, and one day it generates an amazing ecstasy in somebody who is there or hears it, and other times everybody's just sitting there and nothing means anything to them. They're not claiming that. They are servers. And about the way they put it, and it's also been written that way, is that the singer of Qawwali is like the bearer of a tray with wonderful things, like at a wedding. And inviting someone to a wedding, then we send someone, a servant or a cook, we send them out with a tray with wonderful things or flowers. That's what the Qawwali is doing. And so he just provides a service. Once I realized that, then it became even more interesting, because what I found, that they were singing all these songs, these repertoires, poetry. It was all poetry, always. And in fact, an event, a Sufi event, that we often call Qawwali, but really we should call it a mahfil. And a mahfil is sama. Sama meaning, it's an Arabic word that means listening or audition, a very special kind of listening. So it's all about listening. And the people who listen are the ones who are important, because the music is supposed to induce in them an effect that through listening they are gaining spiritual richness, or they are able to create, to even have an ecstatic experience, the kind of thing that you feel that now suddenly a divine light is hitting you. And that is something so special. When that happens, it happens very rarely, actually, in Sufi assemblies. And so everybody is sitting around, and there is always a spiritual guide who is in charge of any of these events. And spiritual guides are in control, because they are responsible for their disciples and for the would-be Sufis. And therefore, they want to make sure that there are sometimes young people, they call it Nojavan Dabha. Okay, young guys, they're hearing the beautiful songs and there's strong tabla playing. Okay, so they come in and they're having fun. That's not the purpose of the event. And so people are not sent out as long as they behave. But many times this has happened, and the leading sheikh would always see that the youngsters sit somewhere at the back, away, because the way that the event is structured, the way people sit, is always in a particular way. There is always, for Muslims, and this is just a quick thing about space. Where is Muslim space? Where is the home of Muslims? Everywhere. The only really, completely permanent place where all Muslims must go and want to go is the Kaaba, Mecca. And so that's where each one of the 5 prayers directs every Muslim to face the direction of the Kaaba. And this is always, when someone comes to visit from wherever, they'll say, in my house, and if the person is one who prays, they'll say, where is the Qibla? Qibla meaning the direction, the correct direction. And so they say it's over there, it's this direction, okay? So then you take, even if it's just a towel, and you put it out, and it stands and it says its prayer. So think of it, you could think of it like an Anderson imagined community, right? There is an imagined and really strong community sense for all Muslims, that everyone, at any time, at prayer time, everyone is focused on that same place. And it's a very powerful thing. At the same time, there isn't really, mosques are built, but mosques are not sacred places. They're not houses of God. They are community worship places. And so it's very different from churches, really. So I think that's all I have to say about this one. Okay. Now, just to add one more thing, women don't have a sense of obligation that they have to go to the mosque. And in the traditional India and Pakistan, the ladies that I've known, they don't go to the mosque. They pray at home. So you don't have to. The idea is really that on Friday at noon, midday, it's a place where you gather, and it's sort of like going to a church service. Anyway, so we have that situation. Now, what about Sufism? Sufis, when they are praying, of course, they're praying toward the Qibla of Mecca. But there is also another kind of direction that Sufis have. And it's not a direction of real, it's an imaginary direction. It's the direction that they say, I'm praying, I don't pray toward the Kaaba. My Kaaba, this is a poem, it's very famous. My Kaaba is the direction where my beloved is. The face of my beloved. In other words, there is an idea that God is a spiritual reality that you pray to. It's a different idea. It's that side of the Muslim God which is not strict rules here and so on. The Sufi notion of God is very much like the other kind, which is also in the Quran, where God says, I am closer to you than you jump your wing. And we don't actually know about this, that for Muslims, God is very distant. God is everywhere, and there's a total separation between God and man. Much more like in the Jewish religion. This is what I've I'm telling you what my experience is over years, okay? What people tell me how they feel. There may be other rules. So anyway, the friend, or this is usually what they say, the friend is God. So the idea is that Muslims have two ways of feeling and approaching God. And I think most of us don't really know that, because we have this sense of the very stern, strict God, the sort of Abrahamic God, starting with the Jewish image of God, and then you have Christianity, where there is a God doesn't really become a man, but you have Jesus Christ, provides that intimacy. But it's a different thing. God is still out there, whereas for Muslims, God and Sufis very much. I know people, for Sufis, they are visiting God, or God has visited them as they meditate, and because God is inside. That is, by the way, also a notion that actually harmonizes very well with Hinduism, although one usually doesn't think that could be so. Okay, enough introductories. Now, I would like to play some examples. First of all, the place where I did my studies is in Delhi. It's the tomb of Nizamuddin Aulia, who is, you could say, like the third, maybe, about the third most exalted Sufi historically. He really existed, and his tomb was built very nicely. These Sufi leaders came to India, starting in about 1300, 12th century. They came to India with the conquerors, and very often, usually, the ruling or the general, whatever, the high up, the leaders, the military leaders have their Sufi partners, their spiritual advisors. Like my husband's family, his father came from a lineage that from Bukhara in Central Asia, and his ancestors came with one of the Mughals. So this is pretty standard. In other words, there is a partnership between the Sufi and the Sultan.
I'm a little concerned that the time is getting to where you're not going to get to the change part.
Okay. All right.
Because that's what you really wanted to focus on.
Yes, I do want to focus on that. So let's not, as you can see, I'm very much past oriented. That's my formation. And I think people like me can never get away from that. So thank you for telling me this. Now let's just get the short videos that give you a sense of how the ritual of the Sama, of Sufi ritual, how it was really very entrenched and wonderful, but it was totally governed by rules and by an authority structure. So, here comes. First, we see there is just an image of the Durga. Now, this is actually an image that I have never seen. I've only seen it here and in this book that I passed around. Because to me, this is part of the change, making this tomb that's so old and so venerable, making it look like a kind of a carnival. So that would be okay. Now, here is an important, one of many pictures. You know, Sufi dancing is now a popular thing, and people like me who study with traditional Sufis say dancing. There's no such thing as Sufi dancing. You know, the word is dancing, but there is only a very, very discrete moving of the feet and turning. This is what the tradition is. However, look at this. This is also the tradition. And can you see that there are people actually dancing to a Sufi performance? And they have these special codes. There are a lot of these kinds of. Can you see it? Their sleeves are hanging, and the idea is that then, with little movement, you know, it creates a real dancing effect. So, in other words, if we change to accept actual dancing for Sufism, it's not something that is it's not heretical, because that was done much earlier already. Now, next. This is the Dargah, the shrine of Nizamuddin Aulia, as photographed by us in 1975. Notice how simple and quite empty it was. Now when we go there, it's full of people, and there are many, many poor people, because a Dargah is always, and it's a place where anyone is always welcome. You can just go there and lie down and see if you have no place to go. All right, now, we are going into the actual method. Chanting had no instruments, just voices. So that's what we got here. But now, this is in front of them. We look straight at the door of the tomb. And right in front of this, you can see the musicians on the floor. We have the Qawwali singers. They have a very low social standing, and they don't have much money, and they have no appointment, as we already noticed. Whereas these are the eminent Sufis who are sitting and meditating. What you notice is that people come and when they are really moved spiritually, they come and they bow down before one of the sheikhs. And part of the rule is that you have to offer something, some money, maybe little. So if you have no money, you can't get up and do that. So that's already a discrimination. And the money that goes there will eventually be the paying of the cabals. The musicians don't get paid. They just get the money that anyone This is the one I would like you to see because it is yes, very dark. I think you should turn it. And that's it for the past. I think it's important because this is a resource. This Sufi tradition is a resource that some people are picking up. Now, what is happening to this? In India, this is still going on. But there is less and less and less patronage. So now we know that Sufism is changing completely, and it is taken over by globalization. And you have the one Sufi singer that I've worked on and worked with is, of course, Nusrat Fateh Ali. And I think he's a wonderful example of someone who somehow had the ability to convey the meaning of his music. And what he did, and really the big change that has already happened, is no shapes. There is no shape anymore. Now the Sufi performer is on a stage. And so you have people, and that stage is on the internet, and so you have this absolutely fantastic treasure of these singers who are on YouTube, and they are, for some reason, YouTube has an effect. I don't know why, because it's intimate, it's small, it's very close up. You actually see the person in front, and so there is a lot of testimonial. And there are some scholars who have written about this, especially Catherine Hagedorn has done a wonderful study. What people who look for Sufism, they are listening to, they're watching someone like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, and they are she's willing to call him God. Now, what does that really mean? Is this an ongoing Sufi tradition now? Because what I'm seeing is clearly what happens when commodification takes over, and you can sell something and you can spread it on the internet and it's beautiful. Well, then it becomes a tourist item, because music really is a tourist it is, well, music is everywhere. It's much, much more global than in other art through internet. And so you have that. And now there are these festivals, and they're all, the commodity offshoots. There are religious, spiritual festivals in Fez, particularly in Morocco, and that's also Sufism, or it claims to be Sufism. Now, what I want to do is ask questions from you, because I am not a Sufi practitioner of the new life. I only know that people there are Sufis in Canada, I know, and I know some American Sufis. Well, they have to change their Sufism completely, because the musicians that made it what it was back home, well, those musicians aren't there, because there are no musicians who can afford to go abroad, and even if they could, there wouldn't be enough money. I mean, so really, the musicians, they go to where they get paid, and so you see them on YouTube and so on, and that's really something different. But is that fine? Is there anything wrong with it? What is actually happening? What is, if anything, the essence of Sufism that is something that is so valuable that we would like to see it go forward? Tell me. I'd like to have a conversation. Can we do that?
There's no prohibition. So.
No prohibition. Well,
no prohibition.
I think you have something to say. Please do.
Let me just say my first comment is that I think I'm just wondering whether one can define an essence of anything.
Of course.
There's an identity and there might be something might have an essence, a person might have an essence, tradition might have an essence, but it's always in a conversation with itself about what that essence is, and it's always in interaction with whatever's on the other side of the boundary, whether it's Hindu or Sikh practices or new forms of sponsorship, I guess. So I guess the question would be, the way I think about it is, how do these new forms of sponsorship, because on the one hand, the earlier form of sponsorship, as you mentioned, was a part of a very strong tradition that had lasted and developed, but it also had its ways of enhancing. Oh, I can speak up. I'm sorry. It had its ways of enhancing the boundaries and the differential in social status. And so, if musicians can find a way of being meaningful to people on more than simply an entertainment level that has a new form of sponsorship, I don't have an answer to that. I'm just raising one way I was thinking about what you were saying.
Well, I totally agree with you. And what my issue is that in today's world, I mean, Sufism has something to offer. Exactly that. I mean, I've seen it in India. Sufi, unlike other Muslim celebrations and so on, and most Hindus, Sufi celebrations, Sufi events, the shrines, well, it's important also that there is an actual place, unlike usually for Muslims. A shrine is a place that's completely open to everybody. People go there. There is a very important, there's a good scene for that in the film Fire, where the daughter-in-law and whatever, I mean, there's some gender problems, and she's brought the problem is that she can't live there anymore. Well, she goes out to this shrine, although they're Hindu, and she's Hindu. But that's where she goes because she'll be safe there, and there is a way that people meet, the different religions have always met in every way through Sufism in India. Now, I don't know how well that continues, how long it will continue, and do we have something that we can have here where people of opposing positions could find a way of meeting and share something. This is what I'm looking for in Sufism. But Sufi musicians are essentially, this is where the social problem comes in, the feudalism, where, I mean, even someone like Nusrat Fateh Ali, he was still a hereditary person from a Brahmin, from, you know, a descent group that does that, that's hereditary. He's a hereditary musician. And so he became very, very famous. He no doubt got high fees, but he also had like 25 people to support at back home who had not, who didn't earn anything. And he became the token, you know, he became the showpiece for selling his music. And so he was hounded, he never said no, because Qawwalis, I know it from the people I knew, they would say, now if somebody comes to ask me and gives me a gig, I'm going to accept it, because tomorrow I'll go out of fashion and then somebody else will get in. And therefore, what Nusrat Fateh Ali did, he went everywhere anyone asked him to go. And he was running across the continents continuously, and he was performing. He was ill, he had terrible diabetes, and he just simply died because he couldn't stay to get cured, he couldn't have a transplant, and so he just dropped dead. So and that's because he also was raised that way. And I see this with other, so there is this class difference, and that kind of layer of people in society is very much still there. So it's just the odd person, you know, who gets some benefit. So I don't know, but on the other hand, that I'm interested in the interest I see in students, young people. They don't have to be, very often it's not people who go to school, like some of the carpenters and people, you know, who worked on a house that we were nearby, and now they got interested. Because if they're independent people, if they are in professions on their own, they're more likely to be, that's what I'm finding. They're not already in a, you know, office job. And I know several people who, they live a more independent life because they work when they can, and somehow we do have a social network, or a safety net in Canada more than maybe we have here. But, so people can survive, and they can pursue an interest. Like I have this one friend, he's a bird watcher. Then he just stops taking jobs, otherwise he repairs houses. So, and he's interested in Sufism because he can make his own decisions. And I don't know if that's something that could be a place where people could find ways of connecting with others who are different, especially Muslims.
So I'd like to encourage everyone to take
please.
part.
Yeah, could you please clarify a little bit, I mean, more this distinction you make between soundscape and music?
Oh.
I think I can guess what you're saying by looking at the videos, but if you could sort of precisely define it, because as it is performed now by Fateh, Nusrat Fateh, others, I mean, there's a lot of raga music, I mean,
Yes, there
and
is.
all of that. So that's what we would normally call music, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So how do you make the distinction from sound?
Well, I won't make that
And-
decision.
Pardon?
I won't make the decision, but I will respect the decision as people make it, you know, because even Qawwali is sort of a borderline thing because it is actually a professional art. And so there are people who go and they take jobs to do, like in Pakistan, for instance. The government has actually started, you know, they needed a national music. India had Indian music, and Pakistani music is the same as Indian music, classical music. So they couldn't have that. So they said that, so they began to have concerts of Qawwali, because so Qawwali became a little more classical, and you know you had government parties and that kind of thing. Yeah, sure.
You mentioned earlier that how Qawwali performance shifted from being only vocal to including musical instruments. Could you tell us a little bit of which musical instruments could we expect to see at a Qawwali mehfil, and like in what ways do you think that changed the experience for the musicians or for the listeners?
Well, traditionally it was totally just a community, and so everybody, it was only community members who formed these groups, and they had also, you could say, they inherited the right to sing in certain shrines, and so there were not any separate drummers, but that has changed because they're getting more into being more professionally smart, and the music is more accomplished musicians. So now you get, when it used to be just one barrel drum that played, now you get 3 or 4 tablas and barrel drums and so on, and because that's more successful. And then they have the harmonium. Now, when it's just there are Qawwalis who also would have a clarinet, sort of the studio music that the British instituted, or that was in the army. Nothing much. I don't see any string instruments, but if they want to create something that's more noble, then maybe there'll be a few sitars there. The one thing you won't have is a sarangi, because the sarangi has a bad reputation. So I don't know how far we can get, if we think of just this particular, the Indian thing is strong, and right now there is a real, the middle class, better off people are getting into Sufi music, and they just do whatever they want, but because they are well-to-do, they can do it. And that's also a good thing. But then the people from the lower class, the real professionals, they actually just don't get anything out of it. They lose. And that seems to be still the way it works in India a lot, and in Pakistan.
How are things changing in the diaspora, for example, here in North America? And how is the diaspora? How are things evolving in the diaspora?
Yeah, I hear it.
Yes.
Well, I know in Canada and also here. I actually wrote up a little article about a group that was a Sufi group that came. The leader was a professor at the University of Toronto, and he came from Ajmer, and he was a bona fide sheikh. And so, but he managed to create a community at the university because he could get a free place to have a weekly meeting, and so there were quite a few students. He's dead now, and that sort of finished it off, and they did also have a problem with not being able to get music. So people are less interested. The thing that now these groups do, if they do anything, is zikr or dhikr, which means just repeating the phrases or repeating the kalma or la la and repeatedly, and there is no instrumental anything with that. But that again is a little less interesting. I'm seeing that also. I read about it in cities of Muslims, not necessarily from India, in Europe. So I don't know. I mean, what I'm missing is the spirit and the beauty of Sufism. How can that become her? You once said Sufism can be a resource. Yeah. So
I wonder if you'd say something about the multilingualism that made it such an important resource, because one of the most interesting aspects of the analysis in your original study is the way that Qawwals use different languages to connect with different patrons. And so, they knew some Farsi, they knew Arabic, and of course Urdu and Hindi and so on. So I wonder how that has changed now over successive generations, the kids, the children of Mehraj.
The children of Mehraj speak Urdu, and they know the repertoire, and that's really wonderful. But on the whole, in order to make a living, I see it with other professional hereditary musicians, what they need is English. And if they can get English, that means they get invited to go somewhere, to travel and so on. And I see that is something, now with the middle class interest in Sufism, the young people all are English trained. So I'm not seeing those languages. They can all speak English together, that's also a way of, crossing the boundaries. But this is another open one.
So if for example, the session we saw, where the person went into a state of lunch during there's usually, it's, as you mentioned, it's very tied to the poetry. And so and that poetry is both with I assume with the musicians and with the people that are not the musicians that are present, is passed on and absorbed orally. It's not,
absolutely.
And so from the point of view of the musicians, you were talking about the need for English but from the point of view of the non-musicians, the participants, if they no longer have if they no longer can be present and know the poems, the ghazals, then how would the experience occur? And
yes, they want to come, that's right. Well, really, I mean, ultimately, the three languages, Arabic is pretty, I mean, there are just a few songs. The Man kuntu mola fa'aliyul mola, even that is very short. But Persian, yes. But of course, I mean, this is the result of Persian being the official and elite language for centuries, and that is just no more now. Because the British got rid of it, and then but still people learn Persian in school. But I think the present young people don't. It used to be, if you were in a Muslim school, definitely you learned Persian. Just like if you were in Hindu school, they learned Sanskrit.
But even with the Urdu, one of their two native languages, would they have the same intimate connection with the poems?
No, you're absolutely right. Because the only one that is more intimately, more close and more intimate for many people is Hindi. because that is, after all, the local language. And the Hindi of Sufism is not an elite language. It's actually very much, mostly it's like women's everyday talk. And they use, and it's a very lovely language, it's very informal and it's charming and people love it. And it's not difficult. Whereas, and the meters are, it's not a complicated language. Whereas Urdu gets a lot of what the attraction of Urdu is its Persian loanwords and the richness of that Persian. But even that is, the new Urdu poets now in India and Pakistan are not anymore the ones that are, flowery metaphors. No, they're much more realistic, and they're talking about calling a spade when it comes to social ills. But that would then not really, I don't know, maybe it would fit. It's possible. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could comment on the effect of Bollywood on Sufi music, because it's a huge industry, and
yes,
in past years they've been making a lot of like commercialized pop versions of poetry and music.
Sure.
Like even Man Kuntu Mola you mentioned.
Yeah, well, Man Kuntu Mola is not. It's not the pop thing.
I was saying there's even a Bollywood version of that.
Oh, there is. Yeah, sure, because the Indian films just they represent the culture. And the word Bollywood is kind of unfortunate because it has really got nothing much to do with Hollywood. So, yeah, I don't know. There is definitely a huge influence, of film songs in general. And I know, and the early decades of film, after the land reform, and then, the patronage went, it was lost of for musicians and singers, and they closed down the salons for courtesans. So those people ended up in Bombay. And poets as well, because poets lost their patronage too when the landlords lost their land. And so the early decades of Bollywood it's exemplary, wonderful poetry, excellent music, and so on, and that's why it lives on, it's very strong. And definitely there are tunes from Bollywood are used by Qawwals in Qawwali. But it's not significant, I don't think, really. Yes.
I guess I can just speak to the case in Pakistan right now, but I was wondering if you could sort of contrast it a bit with India.
Yeah.
On the one hand, definitely you can see the fact that the middle class is visiting shrines a lot more because of they're cleaning up the shrines. If you look at Abdullah Shah Ghazi, they're totally changing it. You're
talking Pakistan.
Yeah, they're putting marble everywhere, they're segregating spaces. So on the one hand, you can definitely see that. But on the other hand, there are people who make a big fuss of expressing distaste towards Sufism, and that's also sort of a class statement. So these two trends seem to be going on in Pakistan at the same time, and it's always a puzzle for me, which is the stronger one. So I'm just curious, in India, what is that dynamic playing out over there as well? Is it different?
India is totally different because number one, first of all, India has land reform. Pakistan has had no land reform. So in Pakistan, the landlords are in place, and a lot of musicians that I've been talking with them, they say it is actually private patronage of landed people that keep them going. Because there is nothing, there's no really public sphere. But what happened in India is, maybe more important, is under the British, they very smartly had a law that religious groups, the religious law of various laws of various religions, of various faiths, those laws were not covered, but they were not controlled by the government. So you have, for instance, Muslim law. There is a possibility that a person could marry more than one wife. Well, according to the Indian constitution, you can't do that. But if you are Muslim, you can, because Muslim law is not controlled by the state. That's very interesting, considering that, because it is a Muslim country, right? Whereas in India, no. Everybody is governed by the same code of law. And that means then the shrines in India, they are generally, and that's actually an opportunity, they generally are endowment, they're religious endowments, which means that they're self-sufficient. Whereas in Pakistan, the government took over the shrines. This happened only in the 70s, I think, because in the beginning, when I was there in the 60s, shrines were just completely independent, but not anymore. They took control. And whereas in India, they want to keep the minorities happy, so they're not going to let that happen. And this is that is what Indian secularism, the word secularism means that in India, is that different religions have equal rights. And if they have their own laws, they can have them, if it's not hurting other people. So I mean, the situation is very different. I had a wonderful time in India doing this somewhat old research, as a woman. But it was not like that in Pakistan. It was more dicey, tense. So, and I have a student now. He's studying in a shrine in Pakistan. So, a big challenge.
You had mentioned to me that you were actually involved or knew when you were involved with the Aga Khan program.
Yeah.
That there was a project to address many of the questions you raised and the concerns, a project to help the Qawwali groups maintain their way of life and give them a more dignified, or allow them to have a more dignified standard of living. Could you talk a little about that?
I'd love to talk about it. I didn't even know about the project until when they invited me to go and talk, and I actually showed these videos. And I met these kids who some of them hadn't even known their parents because they were too little. And so this was fantastic. And I saw this whole project and that's what they do. The Aga Khan Trust for Culture, they have a project, they have a model which they already used in Cairo, where the Aga Khan's really into gardens. And so he built a big garden, they didn't build it, they improved it. And they did the same thing in Delhi. There's a big garden which was very neglected, and some of the local people said, "Why did they put money in this garden? Who cares about that?" But however, they also did other things. Nizamuddin, the shrine is in a village. Well, it's an urban village, very ancient. It's medieval, and very poor people live there. Not just the people from the shrine. And that they undertook that there would be development, there would be infrastructure, that they put sewage and whatever, and they actually there's a whole area where the shrine is. That they have redone so that now there is a wonderful concert kind of a place where the Sufi performers can have regular performances, and it's really, really good. And they have done something great. And they have all these, they have skunks or some awful animals that you get in sewer lines. So they did a lot for that. And they also had, another part of it was that they would give training to young people because they went to school. And so they had a training, when I was there, they had training a group of youngsters who wanted to do this, to become guides. And then they learned the English, and they took people on little guided tours in the village. This has never happened. So, there's a bit of tourism there, and they also did something with schools. And I'm totally impressed. It's very difficult though, and that was like 3 years ago.
Is there any effort to persuade the waqfs, the leaders of the waqf, to think about revising the way that the Qawwals are waiting for people to come up and contribute? Perhaps keeping that aspect of it, but also allowing them to have a base so that they're not completely dependent on what you suggested was a very insecure and even when secure, not very adequate contribution system. And any efforts to talk to the cops?
It's an awfully political question because in these people don't have much, and everyone is suspicious when you come. Oh, these other kind of people, what do they want? And they had to work in this village. I know that story because I have a good friend there. And they had a wonderful person. They had a great team. And I was hoping that now I could go back and work with them. And now that it's finished, they had to cut it down. I don't know why, but it's political. Like there were 2 parties in the 2 elected local guys, I guess, and they had to they joined hands with one, and the other one was complaining and saying, "Oh, this is," and I was hearing, "Oh, they shouldn't have joined this with this person because this other person is actually a man of the people." That may be, because when you come in from outside, you put the money in. So
it would have to be local.
Yes.
And it sounds
in
like
some way.
You don't know of any local Indian or Sufi groups that are thinking about this kind of reform of the way the Waqf and the shrine and the singers. It sounds like that's one of the problems.
You're
and since I don't,
right.
that is deep within your talk.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, and because the socials, the one thing that is not changing is that what I'm seeing is when you have a situation where an underclass, that underclass everywhere, and it's not just musicians, they are an incredible resource because they cost so little. Their wages are very low, and one of the things that India can do to become more competitive in their businesses is that they have a huge labor pool that is dirt cheap, and they're not going to want to give that up. Nobody does. So at least maybe that's a biased statement. What do you say? And I mean, it could be another country. I think it's just human nature. But the other thing is, the Sufi, I think I could spend a lot of time on that. The Sufi organizations were always gentlemen, and historically they are landed people. So I was in one. There's a place outside of Lucknow, Qawwali, which is an old shrine, wonderful. I went there for their urs, for their celebration of the anniversary of the saint. And I was wonderful. I was extremely lucky to be able to see, I talked to everyone and so would like to know, who are your disciples? Well, the disciples are actually the farmers, and the saint is the landlord. So the farmers, they become disciples. And so there was one man who was becoming initiated as a disciple, and I have a video of it. It's very dark, but it's amazing. So he is sitting, the old man is sitting, and the young farmer, and so he talks to him, and he treats them in a sweet, gentle way, and he said, okay, now we are bonded, and he sort of takes out of his own, he uses his hand from his chest, and he puts his hand on the chest of the young man. And he also feeds him sweet, to show that's the bond. That means that now he is going to be looking after this young man. So this is exactly what the Sufi sheikh does. And I think the notion of the Sufi sheikh comes from the feudal experience. A good landlord. And and you can work with that, but then it's always the individual, I think. It's the individual landlord. And the only place, where India can move up, and they have, is because they actually have a political structure which is democratic, and they have they don't just have individuals who can be benefactors, but those individuals have offices. There's a structure of government with elected offices. This is what is definitely missing in Pakistan. And so, but I think the direction you're pointing to is exactly what needs to happen. And sometimes it's also we from the West, we think we know how everything can be done better because we have it better. And so I think we need to understand better how their situation is and how we can support a grouping or so without making them feel that you're just exploiting them, and also without making them think that they can, take you for a ride.
Has there been any interest in this tradition from Muslims outside of South Asia, especially now with the diaspora? Like from an aesthetic or religious? Has there been any interest in the Qawwali or other related traditions from Muslims beyond South Asia, especially given the diaspora? Like here in North America.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you because I cover a lot of Muslim communities in my work.
Okay. Oh, really?
So that's what my media work. So
well, I think
there's a lot of intermingling.
I don't know if they actually intermingle. I know that it starts with the music, right?
Yes.
They listen to Nusrat Qawwali, everybody loves that, lots of people. In the same way, Indian films, they're all over. The whole Middle East, we get people singing those songs, someone from China, and I thought, wow, Indian film songs, so yeah. But I don't know how you can, I think these are really the questions that we need to attack, instead of counting notes, or whatever. We need to find out more. I think Haley is a great example of someone who has started with, studying a ritual, basically, and he has come to a point where he is studying and working with people who are actually managing to get themselves up from the untouchable level to the middle class level. This is so it's music is labor, and you have a wonderful initiative, and I think everyone who works with you understands that. This is what we need.
I think that I want to make sure that we have still time for our informal conversation and our refreshments. So
sure.
If there's no urgent question, I suggest we convene around the table and continue our discussion there. Thank you so much.
We thank you for listening to or viewing our podcast. For more information and for other podcasts, please see our website, divinity.uchicago.edu/podcasts. Copyright, the University of Chicago Divinity School.